Hey, I'm Ryan, and welcome to the Speakeasy Getting Started series. Over the next 4 videos, we'll be covering OpenAPI spec optimization, SDK generation, configuring CI/CD, and publishing your SDK. You'll learn by example as I demonstrate how to create, optimize, and publish a TypeScript Discord SDK so you can see the entire process from start to finish. In this video, I'll be covering linting OpenAPI documents, OpenAPI best practices, OpenAPI security, overlays for extending OpenAPI specs, and extensions for Speakeasy-specific customizations. If you haven't already, install the Speakeasy CLI, then run Speakeasy Auth login to create your account. It's free to sign up and no credit card is required. Let's get started with linting OpenAPI documents. I'll be using the Discourse spec in this video, so if you want to follow along, download it from the Discourse docs repo, then make a copy named openapifixes.yaml. A great way to assess the quality of your spec is using the Speakeasy lint OpenAPI command, supplying the path after the schema flag. The terminal is great for getting a summary of the quantity and severity of issues, but I prefer the lint report as I like how the results are grouped by type and the guidance provided for how to fix each issue. The error here is caused by the schema property in the multi-part request not defining its type as object. In the OpenAPI fixes file, I'll go to the error line number and add type object to the schema property. Then rerun the Speakeasy lint command to confirm the error has been fixed. It's worth investigating warnings to check they're not compromising the quality of your SDK, and addressing hints can add handy features such as automatic retries. You can also get lint results when viewing a spec in VS Code by installing the Speakeasy extension, with every issue listed in the Problems tab from the bottom panel. The linting of an OpenAPI spec is also fully configurable. For example, you can get security recommendations by linting your spec against the OWASP API rule set. Advanced linting use cases are also supported, such as customizing the applied lint rules and rule sets for your SDK. So check out the linting docs to learn more. Now let's dive into some OpenAPI best practices. Servers are essential for defining the default API URL server, as well as alternate URLs for different environments, just like PayPal does here with their live and sandbox environments. Descriptions are especially important for documenting API behavior and requirements that can't be derived from the spec alone, like this example again from PayPal, which clarifies what the soft descriptor field is in a payment authorization request, or this in-depth file uploads documentation from the Discourse spec. It's always safe to assume that developers using your SDK know very little about how your API works or its intended usage patterns. So the more descriptions you add, the better quality documentation Speakeasy can include with your SDK. Tags are used to group operations by resource, which Speakeasy uses to create namespaced method structures. Take, for example, a get method for downloading a backup. Without a tag, Speakeasy can only define a global download backup method, but with a tag, it can create a RESTful resource-based structure that developers expect. If your OpenAPI spec is missing tags, don't worry. Speakeasy Studio analyzes your spec during generation to suggest potential improvements. We'll be covering Speakeasy Studio in the next video on SDK generation. Operation IDs are globally unique identifiers for each operation, primarily used by OpenAPI codegen tools. Speakeasy uses operation IDs as the default method name, so they should clearly describe the action being taken in a human-readable format. But if your operation IDs aren't ideal, they can be overridden using OpenAPI overlay files and Speakeasy extensions, which we'll cover later in this video. Schema components serve as a source of truth for common data structures used throughout your API, such as request parameters and responses. Each schema is defined in the root level components object and referenced using the ref property. Using schemas helps prevent duplicate code and minimizes the risk of properties becoming inconsistent across endpoints. Finally, security schemes should always be used to document the supported authentication methods for each secured endpoint. This topic deserves its own section, so let's dive deeper by exploring OpenAPI security. OpenAPI 3.1 supports defining security schemes that can be applied globally and at the operation level. All standard auth methods are supported, such as API key, basic HTTP, bearer token, and more. Security schemes are too large a topic to fully cover here, but the most important thing to know is that they're the only method you should be using for defining the authentication options for each endpoint, not request body parameters as we can see here. Security schemes are essential as without them, Speakeasy isn't able to generate an SDK client or methods with built-in authentication handling. A security scheme is defined under the security schemes property of the components object with a reference name, the type of authentication, and the required properties specific to that scheme. And for cases where most or all endpoints share the same authentication methods, a scheme can be applied globally using the root level security property. As an example, by updating the discourse spec to use security schemes instead of per operation parameters, authentication is now handled at the client level, so auth details don't need to be passed into every SDK method. OpenAPI security is a broad topic with many options and strategies to explore, so check out Speakeasy's OpenAPI security guides to learn more. Now let's look at how to extend OpenAPI specs with OpenAPI overlays. Overlay files provide the means to create a modified version of a spec, but without editing the original. They contain a list of overrides that update or remove properties from a specific resource, creating an enhanced version of the spec when these overrides are applied against the original spec. Whether it's working around spec errors or applying Speakeasy specific improvements, overlay files are the key to generating a highly optimized version of your spec for SDK generation. Each target in an overlay file uses JSON path syntax to select a specific property, then provides the action type of either update or remove. While overlays can be maintained manually, the Speakeasy overlay compare command generates an overlay file by computing the differences between an original and modified spec, saving the overlay file to the output location. The final spec can then be produced with the Speakeasy overlay apply command, supplying the original spec, the overlay file, and the output spec location. If we now lint the output spec, we get the same result as linting the OpenAPI fixes YAML file. While a high-quality spec sets your SDK up for success, it can only take you so far, as the OpenAPI spec wasn't designed with SDK generation in mind. So let's explore how to apply Speakeasy-specific enhancements using OpenAPI extensions. Extensions allow custom properties to be added to a spec using an X prefix and are designed for tool-specific processing. Speakeasy's list of extensions gives you greater control over your SDK structure, features, and documentation, such as resource grouping and method name overrides. For example, take this section of the Discourse API for listing badges. With the spec as is, Speakeasy generates discourse.badges.admin list badges for the method call, which, while functional, does feel a bit auto-generated. But by using Speakeasy extensions in an overlay file, we can define an admin and badges subgroup with a custom method name. As a result, the method call changes to discourse.admin.badges.list, which feels intentionally designed because it was. Updating each operation manually would be tedious to say the least, but Speakeasy Studio can automatically generate and apply these types of improvements with the click of a button. Be sure to check out the Speakeasy extensions documentation to learn more about the various customization options. In summary, you've now got a solid understanding of linting OpenAPI documents to improve spec quality, OpenAPI best practices, overlays for enhancing OpenAPI specs, and extensions for Speakeasy-specific customizations. Join me in part 2 of the Getting Started series, where we'll be covering the SDK creation and generation process. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the next video.